Hello and welcome to the fan. Wait, that sounds like what Ian says. Like, no, I can't do that. We'll try something. We'll try something different here. What's going on, everybody? It's Chris Allen here, and welcome to the Fantasy Life podcast. I know it's not the normal, usual intro that you'll get from Mr. Harditz, but he's off in Thailand doing whatever married folks do on his honeymoon like this week, and of course we couldn't rest a week without giving y'all what you need and talking ball. So, of course, I'm here with Dwain, the Rock McFarland here to give us talk some like summer best ball type stuff. I mean, talk content. Let's see what we can get going here on those streets. So, of course, before we get into the actual nitty gritty of the schedule, like what's going on, Dwain? Like, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. You and I got to hang out this last weekend with Mr. Harditz. It was a big day for him. We'll save a lot of that content for whenever he returns, but we had a good time. We had John Daigle there, got to meet all of Ian's old buddies, got to hang out with Julia. Here's what I have to say, just two really cool families on Ian's side and on Julia's side. Okay. So I had an absolute blast. And of course, like I said, getting to hang out with you was fun as well. And we were just talking about before the show, we were both feeling pretty good, Chris. We were feeling good.
Yes, to say the least. I was feeling quite well at once we got like later into the evening. I mean, it was hot outside, and I had to have as much to drink as possible so I wouldn't stay like too terribly like thirsty. And of course, afterwards, once you get a few drinks in you, you're starting to feel yourself a little bit. But I had a good time. It was a great time, and we're able to see something like that happen to a good friend of ours. It was a wonderful time, wonderful event and all that. But we'll get into that. We'll have stories for y'all about Ian and his time before getting into the fantasy streets. We'll share all of that once he gets back from his honeymoon. But let's talk ball. Let's talk best ball. Let's talk teams and all that. So let's getting into today's topic. We had the conversation about the schedule release like last week. We talked about overpriced and underpriced players a couple of weeks ago. This week, we're going to try and at least take a high level approach to some of these teams and some of these stacks and some of these just like general situations that are going to be a part of the conversation throughout the summertime. And so let's go ahead and dive into it like for today's show. First question. I mean, what are the top 3 teams that we're trying to target early in these best ball drafts? And Dwain, like before I get to you, I was just going through just like a quick like mental process or like mental exercise of some of these teams that are going off like early in drafts. And like the first 12 players by ADP, like right now over an underdog, from Christian McCaffrey all the way down to, let's say, like Amon-Ra St. Brown, or even like if you want to go into like not even Sam Laporta, but like the first like 12 teams off the board as of right now on underdog ADP. We've got the 49ers, Cowboys, Dolphins, Bengals, Vikings, Lions, Falcons, Jets, Rams, Eagles, Jets again, and Lions, which actually, like when I did that exercise, I was like, oh, dang. 2 Jets players like going in the first round of drafts. I mean, of course, the folks out in East Rutherford, New Jersey are probably pretty happy to see that sort of enthusiasm like for their squad. Of course, Lions out there with another 2 guys going in the first round. But Dwain, for you, like how did you approach this? Like what are the, like for you in the drafts that you've done so far, what are the 3 teams that you kind of find yourself drafting like fairly early, like in these best ball drafts?
So when I read the question on the show sheet, I just thought early best ball season, right? Not necessarily early in the draft, which we have that kind of question next, talking about the high priced best bets.
Yeah.
So like what I tried thinking through for this question, and let's see, right now I'm like 65 drafts in. So I've done quite a few. What I'm really focused on are what are the stacks that could really change in pricing? Meaning I think there's a good chance that like as the summer goes on, like certain parts of a stack could steam. It could be the quarterback side, it could be the receiver side. So that's really more the approach I took. So the top team that I would have on this list would really be the Commanders, because Jaden Daniels just a guy that I've been trying to get as much of as I can. He has been moving up draft boards over the last few weeks, but he's still priced well below the other dual threat quarterbacks. You want Anthony Richardson, you're going to have to take him in round 5. You want Jalen Hurts, you're going to have to take him in round 3. You want Josh Allen, you got to take him in round 3. You want Kyler Murray, you got to take him in round 7. So you're still getting Jaden Daniels in round 9. Yes, he comes with more questions than those guys that are all proven, but he still carries the same ceiling. So that's one that I've really been trying to attack. I don't know that Terry McLaurin will really move much in price, Chris. Right now, he's around 5 price tag, but I do think Jaden Daniels will continue to climb, and we could see him get as high as potentially in that same round as Kyler Murray. I could see people getting that excited. Say it doesn't quite get that high. I still think he could be a round 8 pick rather than someone that you're able to pull the trigger on, in round 9. So that was a big one for me. One of the others is really the Chiefs, because we've got this whole Rashee Rice situation. So the uncertainty around Rashee Rice is continuing to give us this discount where you're able to pick him in the 80s. A lot of times, if you already have Patrick Mahomes on your team, and let's say you take Mahomes in round 4, coming back, you take one of Xavier Worthy or Marquise Brown, or maybe you take, I always take the earlier ADP guy. I take Worthy and just give myself a chance to see if Marquise Brown comes back. But if it doesn't happen, then Rashee Rice, like, sometimes will slide past ADP because you already have Mahomes. It seems like a lot of times it's the Mahomes drafter that wants to take that risk on Rice versus other drafters. So that's one I want to continue to capitalize on. It could go either way. If we find out suddenly that Rashee Rice is somehow suspended 10 or 12 games, his ADP is going to fall further. But if it comes out that, oh my God, his legal team is kicking the can down the road and he might not even get suspended this year, his ADP is going to move up a ton. So that's one that I'm really trying to go after. And the last one is just the Packers, because I think now all the steam that's coming out around Dontavian Wicks, I even put out a tweet just the other day, Chris, talking about, here are your wide receivers that were stuck in limited roles as rookies, but they still went on, in their following seasons to really have these big fantasy production seasons. And what it really came down to are the guys that had at least a PFF receiving grade of 75 or greater, and then they had a targets per route run of 0.20 or more. And whenever you dwindle that list down, here it is, Chris Godwin, Tyreek Hill,
pretty good,
Christian Watson, Rashee Rice, and Dontavian Wicks. It's a very crowded offense. So Wicks getting on the field is still not going to be easy. I followed that tweet up pretty quickly with, okay, here are the targets for the main Packers wide receivers when they were all on the field together in 2023. Well, Christian Watson, 27% target share. Everybody wants to dismiss this guy, say he's just a deep threat, blah, blah, blah. That's just not true. Like, he's shown us in both years, like, he's a solid target earner. He's not a Marquise Valdez-Scantling. He's not a Gabriel Davis. Those guys were never in these target ranges that we see with Watson. The only thing similar is, yes, he is a down the field receiver. And a lot of times when you're running all go routes, well, your target share can come down. But when I look at this, Chris, like, it's just a super easy team to stack. I can get in on Jaden Reed if I want, in round 5. Or actually Jaden Reed's round 5, somewhere in there. And then sometimes he slips towards that end of round 5, maybe early round 6. Then you can come back and you can get, Christian Watson typically around pick 100, sometimes, pick 90, somewhere between those. And then Romeo Doubs is not far after that, but Wicks is the big piece. Like, you're still able to get him pretty cheap. So he's a guy that's got a really good profile. And even though it seems like a crowded offense right now, any one of those wide receivers go down, Wicks could immediately step in and just earn and own that role. And to be honest, he could just win one of those roles outright in training camp, because remember the list I just gave you of Godwin, Tyreek Hill, Christian Watson, Rashee Rice. Like, this is a pretty exclusive list going back to 2011. So those would be the 3 for me. I would go Commanders, I would go Chiefs, and I would go Packers. And it's all based around, I think there's going to be components of those stacks that change potentially significantly in price by the time we move a couple of months ahead.
No, and I think that absolutely makes sense. And now that I'm going back and looking at the question, it's like, damn, that's actually a good point. That is an excellent way to interpret the question and also go about strategizing, like, for your best ball drafts. Because I think I don't know if it's something that a lot of folks take into account, is that we are drafting, especially if we're talking about Best Ball Mania 5 or any of these tournaments, we're not just drafting one time. At least some folks aren't. I mean, you're drafting over the course of an entire offseason where things change. We are getting updated information, it feels like, on a daily basis. I wrote in the newsletter that came out yesterday on Wednesday about some of the information we're getting out of OTAs. Pete Overzet followed up with some more injury news that we were hearing in OTAs, and we're going to be getting updated intel about how these players are integrating into these offenses and how things are changing regarding their rapport with coordinators, quarterbacks, whatever the case may be. And like you mentioned, the case for Dontavian Wicks could be he just outright wins that position. That could be a thing that happens for him. And especially for these other situations that do have about, like, a little bit of uncertainty around them, that's where we can start to change our thought processes, and that's where we'll see the market start to shift. So when I was answering this question, I was almost thinking something along the same lines where what teams that we know we're investing early into them, whether it's like I mentioned earlier, the Jets, the Lions, the Bengals, like the Bills. I mean, insert team name here that you're probably going to have to spend an early round pick in order to start collecting pieces of that offense. And going over some of like the top 5, 6 offenses that a lot of people are looking at like so early in drafts. Yeah, I mean, like the Bills are probably going to be one of the offenses while it's really just Josh Allen that's going in the early rounds, since it like so much of our strategy revolves around stacking. You are going to be investing multiple picks into that offense. But like we talked in the past, it's really like past Josh Allen, like how much certainty do we have in who's going to be like the wide receivers that we're really going to want to target? Past like Dalton Kincaid. I mean, if we want to include like just pass catchers and just generalize it. But the same thing for, if not them, I mean, the Colts, like to a degree now with Anthony Richardson coming back. I mean, Michael Pittman, sure, but like it's according to news, I mean, he should be fine, but the injury scare that he had at OTAs yesterday, bumping knees with one of the defenders. And of course, Richardson, like not having the largest sample size, again, some uncertainty there, but not as much as, let's say, like the Eagles, who were top 10, top 12 in EPA per play like last season. Same thing for the Ravens. I mean, even though we're not like heavily invested or not, we don't go super deep into their pass catching tree. It's really just Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews. Same thing. Chiefs, similar-ish, like minus the Rashee Rice situation that you identified. But at least when I was looking at it, it's like, what situations do I know that I want to invest like early into like in best ball drafts into, like with the higher ADP picks? And that's where you do start to look at things from like a team level and saying, okay, well, what do I know about these offenses? What do I know about the players, the coaches, the coordinators that are involved in them? And what can I say that I know for certain about them right now? And for a lot of them that we're investing those picks in, like I said, like the Eagles, the Ravens, the Chiefs to a degree, even the Texans, like there's another one you can kind of throw out there where we do have some understanding and some at least certainty regarding how the offenses are going to play out, how they're going to at least like what target shares or like what we can generally expect. Again, Texans are a little bit different now with the Stephon Diggs edition. But at least from that standpoint, it does allow us to kind of pick or make those selections with some level of confidence. But still, again, it's as we learn more, like throughout the rest of the offseason, that does at least create, I don't know, like a chance for us to start to adjust like how we make those picks and how we adjust our stacks as we get farther and farther like into the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the beauty of best ball. Like if you are drafting now, and you mentioned it, like I'm trying to take advantage of whatever news cycle dips, and valleys and different things that we get, right? And then if you find out like that some of those players that move down based on like, oh, yesterday Michael Pittman banged knees, like I was in a draft where I actually took Michael Pittman, like 8 picks past ADP, and I was like, well, I mean, some people are hearing everything, they're waiting. I'm like, I'm just going to go ahead and take him here.
Yeah, why not?
I don't have that much Michael Pittman, and I want to get him on some teams, so I'll take a risk and I'll use this potential dip. Now it could have gone the other way because we hadn't heard anything for sure, but it didn't sound like it was serious. Just like everything I was reading, the news was pretty quick that it wasn't going to be serious.
Yeah.
But we didn't know for sure. So yeah, I like using some of that uncertainty or some of the fear that sometimes the market gets. But what I will say is sometimes it goes the opposite way on you. It's just like, if you're trying to bet something like a line at a sport book and you think you've got a really good bet and the market keeps moving against you and moving against you, typically that's a bad sign. No longer should you really feel great about this edge you thought you had. At that point, you're pretty much looking at it and going, I probably shouldn't have made that bet. But it's also part of, when we know we're going to draft hundreds of these teams, I'm willing to sprinkle in, a little bit more risk whenever some of those uncertainty type things pop up. And it's always a fine line. The closer we get to the season, the advantage we have is we know more, we have more information, but so does everyone else. The other advantage you get is a lot of times you get newer drafters coming in that hadn't really thought about best ball, like the sickos that are drafting right now. So for the most part, when you're drafting today, you're drafting against other really sharp drafters that are really well informed. So I just ask myself, like, where do the edges really come from? And some of it can just come from fear, and you won't always be right about it, but I'm willing to embrace some of that. And it's not just the injuries, it's the other things you've mentioned, Chris, like some of the uncertainty that we may have around certain offenses. So we'll hit on some of those here in a minute. I've got some, for another question where I'm really trying to buy into the uncertainty because I feel like other people are discounting some of the pieces of the offense too much.
Right. And let's go ahead and let's hop into like one of those questions that could potentially we can answer some of that or like dig into some of that uncertainty. And let's hop on to question 2. Like, what are the high price stacks that are the best bets to return value? So right now, if I just want to look at it from a like just start off, who are the quarterbacks that are going to drive like some of those stacks? And like the top 6, like this is based off of like underdog ADP. Josh Allen at QB1, then you got Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson. Like those are the top 6. And if you want to toss my guy Joey B going at quarterback 7, like right after that, I will not fault you. Like I will not.
He should be in that. He should be in that tier.
Hey man, you're preaching to the choir. You are preaching to the choir. But but those are the guys that you're going to spend. I say like, and it's not just like a arbitrary cutoff saying the top 6. I mean, you're going to have to invest a like a first like a top 6 pick like into that, which is like fairly high draft capital that you're going to have to assign to one of these quarterbacks. And of course the pass catchers that are going to be associated with them. So for me, you can almost look at them and kind of derive like what the stacks are going to be, whether it's Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid down to Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and or T Higgins. But for me, I think a lot of folks, and I've started to see this like around the industry, it is that Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews stack that people have been hammering over the past like 2-3 seasons, just because we know Mark Andrews has been like a high-end target earner, regardless of the position that he currently plays, but that actually can be a potential quote unquote cheat code given the positional advantage, especially now with the cost reduction since Mark Andrews has been injured a couple of seasons. The cost for tight ends like has been reduced like as compared to years past. I mean, it does present a buying opportunity for what we can consider to be a fairly a fairly potent stack like between those. Then of course we have CJ Stroud. We talked about the relative cost of Nico Collins, and of course with Tank Dell coming back. I mean, but all that to say, I mean, these are situations and these are bets that we're going to have to make. That not only are we confident in like the stack being the stack that you need to have, but also the stack that you need to have relative to the other stacks that people are going to be making. So if somebody were in their draft and they're going to be clicking on Allen, Mahomes, Burrow, or whomever, I mean, Dwain, for you, like which one of those stacks do you think are going to be like the ones that like if I get it, like I'm solid, and then like I really don't have to worry too much about the other stacks that are being made, or like how else I'm going to play the rest of my draft? Like who are you focused on right now?
I mean, it's really tough because those are all great quarterbacks. But like if I think about the criteria for the question, right? What are our favorite high priced bets, right? And when I think about that, well, I want a dual threat quarterback that has a very condensed offense. And there's 2 of them where we feel great about who the main targets are in the offense, and they can also run the ball. And that's going to be Jalen Hurts. You can start off with A.J. Brown in round 1. You can take whoever you want in round 2. You can come back in round 3. You get Devonta Smith, or you take Jalen Hurts. I've seen people play it both ways. I typically, will go ahead and take Devonta Smith, and most people won't want to touch Hurts once you take Smith. They'll let him come back around the corner to you in round 4 because what are they thinking? If there's someone that pays attention and consumes content, they're thinking, I don't have a stack with this other than Dallas Goedert, and there's no other because it's such a condensed offense. That's why that's one of the criteria. People aren't thinking, oh, well, I can take a swing, in the later rounds on Anais Smith. And that's something you could do in round 18, but people don't feel great about it, right? Or if you're a Johnny Wilson guy, that may be the player that you're thinking of in your mind, since we got Devontae Parker out of the picture now, or it's Paris Campbell. There's some guys you can throw on at the very end, but nobody's confident in that. So I love starting off with A.J. Brown, then coming back in the 3rd round with Devonta Smith, and then in the 4th round grabbing Jalen Hurts. I mean, that's a slam dunk stack right there. And you get a good matchup in week 17 if you care about that sort of thing against the Cowboys. That could completely go off the chain. There's a lot of cheaper Cowboys you can add backdoor later, week 17 stuff. Brandon Cooks doesn't cost you a lot. Jalen Tolbert is a starting wide receiver. We don't love him, but he's probably going to be on the field. They haven't added anybody else. He's going to be out there in Michael Gallup's spot. So you can get him in the last round of your draft. Ferguson, is round 8-9 pick. And you can add Goddard on. Goddard is an underpriced tight end compared to some of the other guys. Like, he's going quite a bit later than Bowers and Njoku by almost a round. And I still think that he should be in that same tier with those guys. So there's a lot you can do there. The other one you already mentioned, it's Lamar Jackson, and he's really easy to set up. You can take at the end of round 3. You can take, you can take Zay Flowers and then come back with Jackson. If you get lucky, you get Mark Andrews to slide back to you. Or you can even try to set it up really from the middle of the first round. I don't mind doing that either. If you set up with Zay Flowers, a lot of times Lamar's coming back to you in the middle of that round, and you've got a better chance of getting Mark Andrews. But with him, if you miss on Andrews, I feel pretty good about Rashad Bateman being a starting wide receiver. You also got Devontae Walker, who they spent a 4th-round pick on. You could take later in the draft. But again, mostly consolidated around Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews for that stack. And again, another team that we like the matchup we have in week 17, you get to play against the Houston Texans. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do there. Like, a lot of times if I miss Andrews coming back in round 5, I'll take Joe Mixon. So now I've got a piece of that Houston/Baltimore game. I'm not super focused on like week 17 correlation with my early picks. I use that a little bit more towards like your later picks, looking at weeks 15, 16, and 17. But if it's a tiebreaker, I'm fine with that. So I really think it's those 2 names. Again, I'm going to talk more about Josh Allen and some of these other guys in a little bit. I like the values you're getting on those guys. But if you're telling me, hey, which 2 are your best bets? I think based on what we know, those are the ones. And there's a reason they're priced that way.
Yeah, and like the way that you broke it down, like the criteria that you should at least start to consider when investing those early round picks makes a lot of sense. I mean, the mobility for quarterbacks, that's been something, I mean, since like Rich Rebar started talking about the Konami code, that has been like a larger part of folks drafting. But now when you also start to tie in the strategy around stacking, it's like, okay, well, yeah, I'm not just going to take like Aeneas part, like you were talking earlier. I guess now, what the Eagles signed John Ross earlier today, which also hurts my heart a little bit, like because man, what he could have been had.
I'm not even adding John Ross to the projections until he makes.
He's like
unretired.
I'm sorry, John. Is he even in the player pool? I guess honestly, I don't know, since I thought he retired and now he's back. But like
John Ross is available.
He is available.
Oh, man, he's in the pool.
Maybe I should just do it for nostalgia. Like, I don't know, there might be $25 down the drain. I probably won't do that. But those are the things you have to think about. It's like when it comes to stacking, you're just not grabbing like any old player. Like, it's just, you won't just take like for Joe Burrow. I know people are hyped about like Jermaine Burton, Mike Gesicki, like any of those guys, but even like Andre Yoshivas. But like, are we really going to then just say like, okay, well, I'm going to take Joe Burrow, and then man, like I really hope that I can grab Trenton Irwin like before the draft is over? It's like, no, like you understand the relative target shares like for most of those players, and that's where it goes back to the level of certainty that you have with the offenses that you're investing in, because we know that it's going to be AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, and to some extent Dallas Goedert. For like when you're stacking with Jalen Hurts, we know that when it's at least for, let's say, CJ Stroud, it's going to be Collins, Dell, and then of course now with Diggs involved, it's going to be like one of those 3 guys. And especially even with Anthony Richardson, the mobility is always going to at least put some sort of cap on the ceiling for guys like maybe the AD Mitchell, and we'll see how target shares shake out for Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, and so on and so forth. But at least there is some volatility there, but enough such that it makes sense to stack them with those guys. But you're not going out and saying, all right, well, I've got AR, let me go ahead and also draft, I don't know, Alec Pierce. Like, it just doesn't make enough sense. Jelani Woods, although he has been getting a little bit of hype like in OTAs right now. We'll see if that drumbeat continues once we get later into the summer. But like there's a limit to where stacking becomes like the way to do things, or becomes like minus EV afterwards. And so at least for this, like, yeah, the high price stacks, like when you are drafting or like when you are targeting one of those early round quarterbacks, it has been like Mark Andrews and like Lamar Jackson for me. And then also, I mean, if I am going, like, if I do take Jamar Chase, it's almost immediately like, all right, I'm queuing up Joe Burrow, or even like T Higgins, trying to get the I guess the triple stack, like with that, or the double stack rather, in order to say like, I've locked up, I mean, how much, like almost 50% of Joe Burrow's targets. And of course, and then you look at like what the week 17 correlation is for Cincinnati. They're going up against the Broncos. I mean, not as great, but again, it's something to consider once you get into that point of the draft. And then afterwards, like you are having to consider like, okay, well, what is the viability of that type of stack? So yeah, I'm with you. Like trying to not just take things from a player standpoint, like, oh, I need to draft Joe Burrow, I need to draft CJ Stroud, I need to, like with these tournaments and with these best ball drafts, there's so many other things that like so many other criteria that need to be involved in our thought process when we're drafting. And again, to your point, if we are also going to be in these draft rooms, especially now in May, early June, with a bunch of other sickos that are glued into this stuff and like keyed into all the information coming out of there, I mean, they're also thinking about some of these things too. So trying to get as much of an edge as possible and saying like, well, what are these, like, what's the best bet that I can make? Like if I'm going out and drafting Lamar Jackson, or if I'm like, what's the best bet that I can make if I'm going out and drafting Joe Burrow? What's the best way that I can really start to hit the ceiling outcomes like for those guys? Well, for guys like Jalen Hurts, it's not going to be through, insert like third wide receiver here. It's not going to be through, Trent Irwin for Joe Burrow. It's going to be through the primary pass catchers. And that's where stacking, while also having to consider like those early round quarterbacks, that's where like having to combine those two strategies or those two thought processes or really try and net people a lot of value, like once they get into drafts.
Yeah. I mean, and again, you nailed it. It's about thinking about, you need your player takes and things, and those need to be well formed. But if you're drafting all throughout, the off season, it's about taking all the other layers, right, and putting them together and thinking about how you're investing your picks and why you're investing in that way. So that's why I love this. Sorry, Ian. Like, we miss you, but this is great topics from Chris today on the podcast. Like Ian's gonna have to up his game when he gets back.
I know that's going to be the thing that he's going to have to do, man. I'm sorry. Now it's going to be, he's going to be like, well, screw it, man. Chris can just take over.
You're going to be writing all the show sheets.
I'm going to be writing all the show sheets and all this stuff. I can already see it happening. But yeah, but let's flip to the antithesis of this. It's like, we talked about the guys in the early rounds. That's like, okay, if I want to get Lamar Jackson, I want to get Joe Burrow, I want to get Jalen Hurts, and I want to get all these guys. Okay, well, if we're targeting all those guys, I mean, we're seeing like the OTA highlights. We're seeing Joe Burrow throwing it to Jermaine Burton, working with Mike Gesicki. We're seeing Tank Dell coming back and getting all the hype and like that freaking no-look pass. Okay, did you see that clip of the no-look pass from CJ Stroud?
I thought you were going to do the Aaron Rodgers one that he did yesterday.
No, that one was also ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know what my takeaway from that was? Did you see who was on the other end of that pass?
Garrett Wilson on that one, right?
No, for Aaron Rodgers. Talk about the CJ Stroud one.
Oh no, I didn't see it.
Oh yeah, the receiver on the other end of the CJ Stroud no look pass was Robert Woods. So it's like, do we need to consider Robert Woods?
No, I think what that means is CJ Stroud has to close his eyes if he wants to throw it to Robert Woods. Like he would rather throw it to the other guys, but he saw they were not open, so he closed his eyes and he hoped for the best.
He just hoped. He was like, oh man, like that guy's down there.
Sorry, Robert. Bobby Trees, man, like has been in so many winning fantasy lineups for me. I can't believe I'm like out here talking this trash.
I know
Ian's gonna be pissed.
I know he's gonna like that. See, that's another thing. He's gonna come back mad at me for coming up good topics. He's going to come back mad at you for slandering. Yeah, this is Bobby Tree's erasure. Like we're just, oh man, we're doing it to Mr. Hart. It's like while he's out on his honeymoon. That's terrible of us. All right, but back up to the topic at hand.
Yep.
So who are the guys who are the teams and the stacks and the quarterbacks that you just naturally find yourself avoiding? Like I don't think anybody goes into a draft saying like, you know what, I'm never going to draft this guy. I mean, maybe some people do, but just naturally, if you're pushing other guys up, other guys are going to fall, or they're going to have a blind spot for some of these, or for some of these teams, for some of these stacks, for some of these players. So who has that been for you? I know for me, once I get into drafts, I don't know, man. Like maybe it's my AFC North bias, but I can't do Deshaun Watson. I just can't. I can't do it. I can't do it. Amari Cooper goes around at least a couple of players that I'm more interested in. David Njoku, I need to think. I know that's a leak in my game. Is that I just look at what happened last season, how much David Njoku popped, and how much I have not fully thought through how much that was a product of Joe Flacco, how much that was a product of just having a good system, and maybe if Deshaun Watson is capable of still doing this thing. I mean, of what Njoku's 6 touchdowns, 4 came from Flacco. Almost half of his yards came from Flacco. So it's like, still. Browns for me, and of course, like the Nick Chubb thing, like they've been mostly off my board for right now. And that's not even like factoring in my AFC North bias. But still, who has it been for you that's just like once you get there, it's like, I'm going to look for dudes like around the same ADP and just go that route? Like, who's it been for you?
The Browns are a really good one. But if you took Tyreek Hill, if you took Jalen Waddle, like some of those later round Browns, like Jerry Jeudy and stuff, if you're looking at the week 17 stuff, I've let that force me into some correlation there. But overall, I'm with you. The tricky thing with Amari is like, he's a top 24 wide receiver and a borderline wide receiver 1 like most seasons. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like at some point you just kind of have to be like, we know Amari's never going to be a high-end wide receiver 1, but he's going as wide receiver 29 right now in fantasy drafts. And I mean, if history is any indicator, I mean, he's a near deadlock to beat that. He is a near deadlock to beat that finish. Even with Deshaun Watson. No, so I mean, look, people are projecting these things, and I'm lower than what Amari has finished in the past as well. So I mean, I fall victim to it as well. But like, just when I think about what Amari's done, but that is a good one. I find myself not super excited about any of the ADPs for the Browns, other than honestly, the one I am the most excited about is honestly Deshaun. And it's not that I'm super excited about him, but like once you get past Jaden Daniels and you're looking for someone that could have rushing upside that should pretty much we know is going to be the starter for their team, because we don't know this for Justin Fields. We're thinking maybe he could eventually take over at some point in the season. So if you set Justin Fields aside, like once Jaden Daniels is gone and you're looking for someone that could potentially give you 500 to 600 rushing yards, like it's Watson. He's not a lock to get that, but he still has the skill set to do that. And he's surrounded by talented players. So I've also tried to stay open-minded about tacking on Watson if I do take Cooper, if I do take Njoku, if I do take Jerry Jeudy, because it feels like everybody just wants to completely avoid Deshaun Watson, but like the archetype of player that he is still there. But to answer your question, and this could really kill me, Chris, but like the name that I've only drafted like twice, and it's been when they fell to pick 9 or 10. So this doesn't happen often, and you also have to be the one in that spot to make it work. But it's the Vikings. I don't really like where any of them are priced. I love Justin Jefferson. I agree Justin Jefferson's the best wide receiver in the NFL, but we're talking about a quarterback, Chris, that's going to go from playing with, a veteran like Kirk Cousins that could average 275 passing yards per game to my best guess for JJ McCarthy will be, we hope he's somewhere between 200 and 225. And I know people say, oh, well, look at Nick Mullins. He was 250 to 275. Well, Nick Mullins had already been that kind of player his whole career. He's a YOLO guy. He's going to go out there and throw for a lot of yards, but he's going to throw picks. He's going to end up getting benched. That's not what they're going to try to do with JJ McCarthy. Now, McCarthy could still surprise me, so that's why I need to be careful about this. But I don't want to take Justin Jefferson over Amon-Ra St. Brown, not doing it. I don't want to take Justin Jefferson over Bijan Robinson, not doing it. I don't want to take him over Breece Hall, because I think all of those guys have a higher ceiling. Once you get past those names, I'm willing to take Justin Jefferson. The problem is he's usually gone. Well, then you go look at Jordan Addison and really where his ADP is and the guys that it's around. Well, if you imagine if I'm worried about Justin Jefferson and you've got an offense that we think is going to throw for 200 and 225 yards per game, well, you really have to be worried about Jordan Addison, especially at the time of the year when you're going to be trying to win your championship, which is those last 3 to 4 weeks, which is by the time TJ Hawkinson will probably be ready to actually be a factor on the field. Early in the year, you might get some returns on Jordan Addison, but I worry about later in the season. And then Hawkinson, that brings us to him. Like, even though he could be ready to win you a championship by later in the season, like where he's going in drafts is still too high. Like, people have not adjusted enough on TJ Hawkinson, but I get it. Once certain names are off the board, you're looking at it and you're like, well, who's the one guy that still has upside? If I get really lucky here, it is TJ Hawkinson. So I don't see his ADP changing much over the course of the summer, probably going to stay about where it's at. I like the game against the Packers, in week 17. But again, that's a small component of what I'm thinking about whenever I'm spending these early picks. So this could burn me. But at the same time, I feel really good about the other players that I'm taking over a Justin Jefferson. So I want to get more exposure. I probably will get to some point at the end of the year where I'll force some Minnesota stuff, but I'm trying not to do it right now. I'm trying to let it all happen organically. Let's say Justin Jefferson falls to pick 10. That's probably the draft where I'm going to be willing to go ahead and take Jordan Addison. That's probably the draft where I'm going to be willing to, if I miss Jordan Addison, take TJ Hawkinson. It's also the draft where I'm probably going to be willing to take JJ McCarthy, because if for some reason I'm wrong about McCarthy, well, then now, like, I just, if I, when I do build my Vikings teams, I want to really be more all in, on the Vikings. So, again, I'm not saying Justin Jefferson shouldn't be a round 1 pick. I just don't think he has the same ceiling as some of those other guys. And here's just some quick data for folks. So if you go back to 2011 and minimum 250 routes in a season to qualify for this, but if you look at teams that have thrown for 200 to 225 passing yards per game, you want to know how many top 6 wide receivers we've gotten? 10 out of 414 available candidates. That's 2%. Okay. So it's really hard to hit that ceiling. Even if you're a really good player like Justin Jefferson, there are a lot of really good wide receivers that fell in, that were names that fell just outside of this. So it's still possible. But even if you get that top 6, the question is, does Jefferson really have the chance to just completely bury you, assuming your other round 1 pick is healthy when you take them? Meaning, can he go out and score 23, 24 fantasy points per game? I don't think so. I don't think he's going to do that this year. I think he'll be a solid player, but you really need a team that can throw for more yards per game to get super excited. So just at the cost, it's the Vikings. That's been the team that I've really been staying away from.
Yeah, that one makes a lot of sense, because past Justin Jefferson, knowing his penchant for earning targets, the role that he has once they get into the red zone, okay, that's all fine and good. But then past that, it's like, all right, you draft Justin Jefferson. Are you doing the same thing like I was talking about earlier, where, all right, I drafted Jamar Chase. I'm going to queue up Joe Burrow. Oh, I drafted A.J. Brown. Well, I guess Jalen Hurts goes like fairly quickly thereafter. But it's like, you see what I'm saying, where it's like you draft the player and you're already thinking about, well, where's the quarterback at? I don't know if folks are doing the same mental thought process whenever they click on Justin Jefferson. It's kind of like, okay, cool, I've got Justin Jefferson. Now where else am I going? Like, who else am I drafting? The other team that I was thinking about, it's almost the same thing here. If you draft Malik Neighbors, like, who are people really caring if they're gonna queuing up Daniel Jones and or Drew Lock?
He is such a one-off pick for me right now. I do like Malik Neighbors, so I want my exposure. I have clicked on Danny Dimes a few times, but it's really hard because Dimes is recovering from the ACL, and we know a lot of his value comes from what he does as a scrambler. And I just worry that we saw this last year with Kyler Murray, like his scramble rate and his involvement in the design run game was down. And I think we'll probably, at least in the early part of the season, we're going to see that for Daniel Jones. Maybe if he stays healthy, he picks some of that up late in the year. When guys are scrambling, if they know how, like they can really protect themselves because they can see all the defenders' backs are to them. They can get an angle to the sideline. So there's still going to be a little bit of rushing upside for Daniel Jones, but the ceiling's not as high. And I just worry that if he comes out and he struggles and they're losing, do they just go ahead and turn it over to Drew Lock? So I don't do the stack a lot. Malik Neighbors is mostly a one-off for me.
Yeah, and I'm the same way, where it's like, if you had told, like, if you just like to sell a player like Malik Neighbors, where it was like one of the top 3 wide receivers in his class, gets the high draft capital, going to a situation on a team where he should be one of the top, if not the top target earners, like on the team, like all those things, is like you rattle off those 3 bullets, and it's like, yeah, I want to invest in that player. I want to invest in that guy. And it's like, oh, it's Malik Neighbors and he's tied to Daniel Jones. It's like, well, shit. Like, well, I don't want any of that like now. So
yeah, and that data I was giving you earlier, like it doesn't just it's not just for top 6 finishers. So like if you're on a team, and I would put the Giants in this bucket, that they're probably going to throw for 200 to 225 yards per game. Like just quarterbacks typically own most of their passing yards. Even if they get an upgrade in weapons, they might see like a 10-yard bump, but it's really hard for them to break out of that. There are certain schemes. I know you guys are all thinking Brock Purdy, and you should. You guys are all thinking Tua and the big steps he made, and you should. But remember, those are very unique circumstances. We're talking about Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, CMC, all arguably top 12, Kittle's a top 5 tight end. You got Deebo and Ayuk. Either one of them is on a team by themselves. They're probably a wide receiver 1. You've got the best receiving back in the league. So those are really extreme. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, same kind of really extreme thing.
Good offensive line, all of that.
Like if you put Daniel Jones in the 49ers or you put him, with the Dolphins, I agree. I would immediately project him for more. But looking at the offense right now overall that the Giants have to roll out, like I would bet significant money that he's going to be between 200 and 225 yards. And so I mentioned 2% of the top 6 wide receivers have come from teams in that group. Only 3%, 5% in the next bucket, which is wide receiver 7 to 12. So that's not very many. Okay, now we're getting into wide receiver 2s. Only 10% of wide receiver 2s in the past 10 years have come from that bucket. So it's not just getting the very high end outcomes. It's even as you start to look down at trying to even have a wide receiver 2 or a high end wide receiver 3 finish, being on a team that really struggles to throw for more than 225 yards per game. It's been a recipe for a pretty much disaster.
Yeah. And that's why, to your point earlier, talking about Jordan Addison and what the potential for his outlook would be for 2024 and having to be supported like by JJ McCarthy and his, it's I'm very hard pressed to make the click on guys.
And it makes Malik Neighbors, honestly, as much as I love him, not a name that I'm excited to click on every time. I want my exposure to Malik Neighbors because he goes in round 3. I've gotten him in round 4 one time. So there's occasionally and that's not very often. I like to get him a little bit past ADP. And I want my exposure, but I don't see Malik Neighbors being a player that I'm way overweight on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're all of those guys are tough bets to make, like at cost, just given their situation. So if I'm in those types of lobbies where those guys come up, I do tend to look elsewhere. But hopefully, over the offseason, maybe we get more positive reports. Maybe things start to change and where it makes things a little bit easier. But like I was just saying, tough.
Probably for a team like the Giants, I'm curious in your thoughts, is like, I know what Daniel Jones is. There won't be any amount of news that will change my view on him. Like I have a career resume on Daniel Jones. So I could hear every puff piece from every freaking New York beat writer on the planet about how good Malik Neighbors looks, about how good the offense looks. It's probably not going to move me much. I think that's a very slippery slope once we've got, a resume with a body of work as large as we do on a guy like Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
But there are other teams where I feel like we don't know as much about the quarterback, as much about the weapons, the offensive coordinator, new things being implemented. And we'll get into some of these teams here in a little bit. You've got a perfect question on the agenda for that. But those are the teams that I'm more willing to really change my stances on. It's tough for me to get excited about, some of these quarterbacks that have been around so long and me suddenly buying into, oh, the offense looks great. They're going to be a different story this year.
No, especially for like the Giants in particular, where it's like we know how Dayball is gonna want to run the offense, and like the same thing for like the Browns when we were talking earlier. I mean, there's not with Stefanski, like there's not going to be enough like just monumental shifts in how they deploy that offense for us to say like, oh, this could change things, or this is going to be the year like Daniel Jones hits or whatever. Like they're not going to show their cards that much to the point where we hear enough about the schematic wrinkles they might want to like integrate into the offense now, where it's like, oh, now we're excited for Daniel Jones. This is going to be the year. Like I don't see it. Like
it's kind of like Derek Carr. I feel the same way about. And I'm fine like taking Chris Olave and some of these guys, but
yeah,
I really don't care what Clint Kubiak does. It's not going to be enough. I've seen Derek Carr for long enough to know he's not going to suddenly turn into a 5,000 yard and 40 touchdown passer, which is the kind of upside I'm going to need. Like if he's going to just be a pure pocket passer. Now, could he maybe give me a few more spike weeks, which is important in best ball? Yeah, sure. Maybe so. But I'm not gonna suddenly think because of Clint Kubiak's offense that we're gonna get Derek Carr turning into a superstar quarterback. Maybe it bumps him up a couple of spots, has a few more, like I said, spike games. But I think you got to be really careful with some of these quarterbacks where we've got a really, again, a long resume that we know really who they are.
Yeah, and almost now like extrapolating that to a couple other examples where it's like for Derek Carr specifically, Juwan Johnson, Rashid Shaheed, like guys that are going like in the later rounds that people do have at least some excitement of, not Rashid Shaheed, but Juwan Johnson, where like there is some excitement around like them and what type of value you can return on them. But when you are attached to a quarterback like Carr, we know his play style, we know what his high end, like 99th percentile ceiling case is going to be for a guy like Derek Carr. What's really going to move the needle? Like going back to like the examples I was given earlier, it's like, what if we get the, Juwan Johnson is tearing up like mini camp and Rashid Shaheed, like in best shape
that's the challenge. We know enough about Johnson, maybe Shaheed, but even with him, not a super high-end target earner, has done some decent things on some of his seasons from an efficiency standpoint.
Yeah.
But like he would really need to turn into Deebo Samuel. And Chris Olave, I think is comparable to Brandon Ayuk. Like if you have those two guys and they're just going bananas, it could be fine. But we've also seen Derek Carr in the past with, Amari Cooper plus Michael Crabtree when Crabtree was still really in his prime. So we've seen Derek Carr support two top 24 wide receivers, but we've never really seen him anywhere close to turning two wide receivers into top 12 guys, which would, by the way, also turn Derek Carr into a potential top 12 fantasy option. So again, like to me, a lot of this for the quarterbacks just comes back to how many years we've already seen them. And, like Dak Prescott, we know he can do it. He's done it. He's done it so many different times with a loaded offense, a non-loaded offense. As much as people want to gripe about Dak, we know that he can support that type of fantasy production. But again, this is all priced in. It's not like people love Derek Carr. He's a backdoor quarterback stack when you're looking for your quarterback too, and you've got Chris Olave already on your team.
Yeah, and that's how people should look at it, where it's like, you're not looking for the quarterback that's going to like vault into like the top 12. It's just like, can he support my stack? Can Derek Carr potentially?
On the weeks Olave goes nuclear, I also like to have Derek Carr.
Yeah, it's like, but potentially like a Juwan Johnson at cost or Rashid Shaheed at cost or something like that, where that becomes like a bit more viable. That's an easier bet to make than the other ones that we were talking about. Or even if the ADPs start to rise, it's like maybe I might fall off of Rashid Shaheed or I might fall off Juwan Johnson. Like if it's like you were hearing those camp puff pieces and all of that. And
you're hearing all the Taysom love.
Oh yeah,
going to be a major
package
factor.
Continues to grow. Like there ain't nothing. He's working with the fullbacks and all that. I mean, it's gonna be. But those are again like harder bets to make for sure. And speaking of bets, we're heading into the final rounds in the NBA playoffs, but there's still plenty of time to get on the action with our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. Like right now, not tomorrow. Right now, well, still probably tomorrow. All new customers who deposit $5 will get a no sweat bet up to $1,500. That's right. New customers who deposit just $5 will get a no sweat bet up to $1,500. DraftKings has got something for the returning customers as well. Score a no sweat NBA bet, and if sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code QUESTIONS, QUESTIONS, and deposit $5 and get a no sweat bet up to $1,500. That's promo code QUESTIONS only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right. So got a couple more questions that we'll get through. See if we can, ping pong these like back and forth for a little bit. And we were just talking about, you mentioned it, Dwayne, backdoor stacks. And like for people that don't know like what a backdoor stack is, we're talking about like your draft just goes haywire. You're planning to get, I don't know, Kirk Cousins later and you get sniped on it. You're trying to complete that Joe Burrow stack, but somebody takes Joe Burrow after you get Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I mean, everything just goes awry. And you have to grab a quarterback and you need to get like the wide receivers or pass catchers that are associated with him to complete the stack. And who are those guys that are available in not just in the late rounds, but their pass catchers are available in the middle to late rounds as well, that you think that you can create a backdoor stack and at least escape the draft with some semblance of a strategy. So Dwayne, who has that been for you?
Yeah, for me, it's mostly been Bryce Young, because I can now you don't necessarily get to take Young. The beauty is you get to take Young last, but say Deontay Johnson, let's just leave him out of the picture. He is my most drafted wide receiver. My most drafted rookie is Jalen Polk. So that kind of will lead you to the other, even though we don't know for sure if Drake May will be the starter to begin the year like that. That's the other team that I look at a lot, is the Patriots. But again, you're making bets on when things go right. If Jalen Polk is going nuclear, it's probably because Drake May got on the field and was way better than what we thought, not because Jacoby Buss drove the bus all year. Even though Jacoby did have that good year a couple of seasons ago with the Browns, he was a functional NFL quarterback. But I try to think of like, what is the ceiling case? Well, when I look at offenses, Chris, that I think have possibly improved the most that people are not talking about, I think the Panthers are one of them. You had two new offensive linemen. You already had Adam Thielen, and as much as people want to make fun of him and talk about how empty his targets were and all that crap is, you know what? I don't buy into that as much because other NFL teams like know who your best weapon is, and they're trying to take them away. And so eventually there did come a point in the year where, yeah, Thielen was no longer good enough to probably beat double coverage or take on the full focus of, a defense. But now Thielen arguably is your third option, depending on how things go with Xavier Legette, and then you added Deontay Johnson. So with those additions, you can get Leggett, like he's one of the guys, like honestly, like if you just look at where Leggett went in the NFL draft, and even though we have the supermodel and there's things that didn't like about him, but like, we can be wrong about these things. But there's a guy that went in late round 1 and he's going at pick 139. That is way later than all the other guys that were early second round picks besides Jalen Polk, which is another reason that I mentioned him, and some of these other late first round picks. He's going quite a bit later. So it's really easy to come in and get Leggett. We got some good training camp reports. I don't know if they're good or not, to be honest. It's still crap like, oh, we're handing the ball off to him, getting him on sweeps and stuff. Like, can he go earn targets on his own? That's still really TBD. But then again, Thielen is another guy that you can tack on after that later. So it's super easy to get access to an offense that I think has really improved quite a bit. So I would say that is one of them. And then the other one really is the Patriots. We already talked about Jalen Polk, but Javon Baker is another one. Demario Douglas, like people don't want to touch this guy. And like all he did was go out and have a 23% target share last season. And the healthy games that he was in, I realized he didn't score a lot of touchdowns. But when you're getting someone that late in the draft that we know can go out and earn targets from the slot, like I think you can do a lot worse. So the Patriots and the Panthers seem to be the two teams that I turn to the most when I'm like, oh my God, like I can't believe someone just took that quarterback when I've set all these other things up. That's where I often turn.
Yeah, and for the like Drake May enthusiast, his final season in college, just over 10% like scramble rate. That's just behind Jane Daniels, and so that's just scrambling. I mean, don't even incorporate like the design rushing attempts that North Carolina was integrating into the offense like for him. But if he is going to be one of those guys, I mean, if we're already kind of going head over heels like for Jane Daniels with the rushing component to him, once Drake May gets on the field, which we're assuming he's going to be, at least I am at some point throughout the season. I mean, for the draft capital that the Patriots spent on him, I'm assuming at some point, like we'll see him on the field, and with the connection or with the pass catchers associated with him. I mean, that's a fairly easy backdoor stack that you can put together.
Hunter Henry's cheap too, and he's going to be on the field. So you get
that's another
solid in there. Antonio Gibson, a passing down back that's also cheap. So there's all sorts of ways to stack the Patriots.
Yeah. No, I love that. The other one that I'm thinking, I don't know if it's going to be I think this will be less sneaky or less of a backdoor stack once we get later into the offseason. But I'm looking at the Seattle passing game as one that I'm really interested in. They bring in Ryan Grubb, OC from the college ranks, with Mike McDonald. I keep switching between Mike McDonald and Mike McDaniel. I get that confused like all the time. But either way, new head coaching change. Also bring in the OC change as well. And then after last season, we were drafting Geno Smith after the high of the 2022 season where he finished like QB6. He was QB 19, if memory serves, like from 2023. And now he's being drafted all the way down at QB 23 this year, where we know he's got Tyler Lockett. We know he's got DK Metcalf. We know he has something of a disappointment like in Jackson Smith and Jigba with how he went out in his rookie season. But all points indicate to Ryan Grubb being more of a pass first coordinator. I mean, if you look at some of the work that's been done by like Hayden Winks and other people trying to chart out how the Seahawks can potentially like run their offense like through the quarterback, not just from a pass rate over expectation standpoint, but also like how far downfield like they were targeting as well, like when Grubb was at Washington. So given the fact that it's Geno Smith, I mean, he was injured throughout the back end of last season with the elbow injury. That's what we saw. Drew Lock with that iconic, like did the backpack thing when they beat the Eagles. I mean, that's where like I think Geno Smith for this season coming back with, again, we know what his pass catchers are. We know that their offensive line should be in a healthier state. They also had a couple of their tackles go down throughout the season. And they also have this like the coordinator with a more of an aerial attack like type of mindset when it comes to like how they want to run that offense. So that fits Smith stylistically, and also the use of like more motion and shifts and all that to get guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba like separated like from defenders, which they weren't doing at all, at least relative to the rest of the league last season. At least for me, like where he's going right now, I mean, most folks you can get DK Metcalf at like wide receiver 23. Smith and Jigba all the way down like in the 40s in terms of the wide receiver ranks. And like I mentioned, like Geno Smith, like going out like right now at QB 23. And even if you want to go all the way farther back, I'm starting to like really get into like Noah Fant as like a later tight end, like I want to draft as well. So all of those guys combined with the change in coordinator, knowing what Smith, at least the ceiling outcome could be for Smith, because we just saw that in 2022. That's an easy guy that I want to at least try and pair with my guys. Like, should any of the more popular options, considering 22 other quarterbacks go before him, he's been a guy I've been trying to tap into as much as I can.
Yeah, and Tyler Lockett's my favorite part of that one. You did cheat though, because this is not a backdoor stack, but I'll let you have it.
I like it. I like it because it's more.
I had the Seahawks down for one of your next questions though. But yeah, the Tyler Lockett, your backdoor piece is really Noah Fant.
Yeah.
That you can add after you get Geno, but Tyler Lockett at wide receiver 51. I mean, I'm really in on that. I mean, Tyler Lockett is one of my most owned wide receivers. Also, if I look at a certain build where maybe I didn't get quite as many wide receivers as I wanted, or I took a couple of rookies in the earlier rounds, and I'm looking for someone that's a veteran that I know is going to be on the field, hopefully healthy to start the season, that can come out and have a few of those explosive games. I think Tyler Lockett firmly fits into that equation. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba, even though he didn't have that great of a year, he mentioned he's wide receiver 43, but you're getting him at pick 80. So that's a guy that you can get in round 7. So yeah, I like getting JSN at that price tag, and I love getting Tyler Lockett. I don't mind taking both of them and then coming back for Geno as well. And then you mentioned Noah Fant.
Yeah. That's what at least that's the criteria for backdoor. It's a single stack. That's why I like included in there. But yeah, I totally I understand. I bent the rules a little bit. I'm hosting.
It was still a good one. You still picked a great team. The Seahawks are one of my favorite teams to target in these drafts. The other name is Zach Charbonnet. We know Kenneth Walker. We really like him, but this is a guy that they could give a little bit more work this year. Or if something happens to Walker, like you get this contingent value, we know that he can play on all the downs. We get this new coordinator in there that maybe won't, feel like they got to work in a third back that comes in to steal away passing downs. They could just get it isolated down to these two starters. So yeah, there's just a lot for me, and there's a lot here to like about the Seahawks. So I'm with you.
Yeah, and that's what kind of puts them into like this, like the uncertainty we were talking about earlier, where we don't really know like what these teams are. We know who the players are. We have at least some sort of like emotions about each of the pieces associated with them, but they do fall into that bucket of, well, I don't know what to do with them at the moment, because we clearly don't know what to do with Geno sitting down at QB 23. I mean, he finished his QB 19. We're drafting him at QB 23. He should have at least a decent shot at outkicking that ADP, but we don't know what Ryan Grubb is going to be. At least we have some data that points us in the direction that it could be good. But that's where like the Seahawks are one of those sneaky teams. So that maybe once we get into July and we're hearing more from Tyler Lockett, like talking about Grubb, and he's like, man, he's got his running, he's got his in JSN, like doing all this, like, running around and doing jet sweeps and all this other stuff, that we start to buy into that a bit more. Almost maybe the same thing for some of those teams were a bit farther down on, like with the Saints and like the Giants and all of that. But again, like we're more high on the players. We just need the scheme to really fit that in order for us to have like more confidence in making those clicks and for more excitement about what that offense is going to look like. So Seattle falls into one of those sneaky teams, like for me, and I'm pretty sure that's the same for you. But if you can think about another squad, another offense that's where it's like, all right, I kind of have a feeling about what this could be, and it could be good or it could be bad. But what are those sneaky teams for you that like you kind of find yourself targeting, but like it's just, I don't know, like we'll just see and like try and get as much information as we can.
Yeah. So when I thought about this specific question, what are the sneaky teams we really need to monitor? I was looking for really two things: new quarterback play or including a new offensive coordinator. Right. So that's kind of how I force rank these. So technically, the Minnesota Vikings would fit into this, because if suddenly we feel really good about JJ McCarthy, that will change our expectations around Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, some of these other targets. But we've already talked about the Vikings. You hit on the Seahawks. I had them down here as one of the names because you mentioned Ryan Grubb and really the type of offense that he's run. And then you look at the weapons that Geno's got at his disposal. I think that's definitely one that we've got to keep an eye on. Would not surprise me at all if Geno really bounced back to the form that we saw 2 seasons ago, and that we get multiple players outperforming their ADP. But the others that I put on here. The Panthers were one, which we
Mhm.
already talked about being one of my favorite backdoor stacks. So I'll just leave that one alone. But a lot of improvements to the Panthers offense, but we want to pay close attention, see how that's all coming together. But the Broncos, like the Broncos have so many questions. We've got Bo Nix. I feel pretty good that he's going to end up being the starter. I mean, we've got Jarrett Stidham there. He could definitely battle. But then we're looking at, the MILF Hunter. MILF Hunter, I'm not worried about. So who's going to be the starting quarterback? And then look at the receivers. After Cortland Sutton, we've got Marvin Mims Jr., we've got Troy Franklin. Yeah, we've got some veterans like Josh Reynolds and potentially Tim Patrick standing in the way. That there's a lot of potential value there. And then Greg Dulcich is by far the best receiving tight end on that team, and no one's talking about him. He's going undrafted right now in best ball. He's my most drafted tight end. I don't know that he'll turn into an every down tight end, but for where you're getting him in drafts, like I think he will be the primary receiving tight end still for the Denver Broncos this year. Now, remember, Sean Payton, even when he had Jimmy Graham, didn't give that guy 85, 90% route participation. So Greg Dulcich, he's not going to get that. Before you get him, he's a guy that can stretch the seam, do a lot of good things. So the Broncos, like all these guys are going late because people are so uncertain. So I really want to understand that one. You also got the running back room. Javonte Williams right now, a guy that people are kind of staying away from, Chris. I mean, he's going in round 9 and 10 of fantasy drafts right now. You got Audric Estime goes undrafted. You got Jaleel McLaughlin versus Blake Watson as to who's going to be the guy trying to come in and steal the 2-minute offense and stuff. You still got Samaje Perine. So a lot of moving parts in that offense. And again, the key being that they're all super cheap. So if we can get a line on how we think that offense is going to work out, what kind of offense we think that's going to be, there could potentially be some value with that one. We already talked about the Patriots, with Drake May. So I'll leave that one alone. But the other one is the Tennessee Titans.
Oh, yeah.
We got Will Levis. Showed the ability to come out and make amazing throws last year. Also, a play later showed the ability to make some of the worst throws you've ever seen. So the thing with Levis is, can we get consistency? Because the weapons are there. DeAndre Hopkins, people can dog him and say whatever they want until he falls off. Like, I think you just have to kind of accept that this guy's still a high-end target earner. This guy came out last season, Chris, and was one of the best target earners in the National Football League. It just really all comes down to what can happen with Will Levis. And if Will Levis comes out and he's playing a lot better, I think people are going to feel great about what they're getting with DeAndre Hopkins as a round 7 fantasy pick. There's not a lot that you got to put into it. I've heard some people that are really smart, that think a lot about best ball and strategy and stuff like that, say they're out on DeAndre Hopkins. For me, it's just hard because we're getting into round 7. Sometimes he falls into round 8. So once you're in that range, when you're talking about a guy and people are worried that he's fallen off, well, the number one way to know if a player's fallen off or not is to look at their target earning ability. He had a 28% target share last season, 28% against man, 30% against zone, still doing everything well. And then you got Calvin Ridley, who gets added to the mix. And I know that did not work out last year necessarily in Jacksonville, but once that offense got narrowed down and we weren't dealing with 4 or 5 guys, Calvin Ridley did have some big games down the stretch with Trevor Lawrence. It was really all about him and Evan Ingram over those last several weeks. And there's a real chance in Tennessee, it looks like it's going to be 3rd wide receiver by committee, right? Probably going to get some Tyler Boyd. You're going to get some Treylon Burks. You might get a little Kyle Phillips. Chigo Okonkwo doesn't really get enough, route participation. Maybe they'll change that. But, you got Brian Callahan coming over. So you've got a young quarterback. You've got the change to a coordinator that has been pass first in the past. And if you look at the way they built their backfield, it's around 2 well-rounded backs that can be good as receivers with Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard. So I kind of feel like they're going to put their foot on the pedal and they're just going to see what happens this year with Will Levis. So that's a team I do want to pay attention to in the preseason, really see what's going on with Levis, because there's a chance that, man, there's just some massive values right now as far as ADP goes with the Tennessee Titans. So like final list, Panthers, Seahawks, Broncos, Patriots, Titans. Those are the ones I'm the most excited to learn more about.
Yeah, and I think all of those are definitely on my radar. The Titans, I think even just from a process standpoint, I think they're doing the things that you would want or expect of any franchise to see if their quarterback has the skills, has the ability to be like their QB1 moving forward. You would want them to invest in their offensive line. You'd want them to bring in as many pass catchers, regardless of where you think the skill level is at. If you think DeAndre Hopkins has fallen off, you think Calvin Ridley was part of the problem like for the Jags last season, Tyler Boyd doesn't have it anymore, or whatever the case may be, surrounding them with talent in order to like, so there is no there aren't as many questions around whether it's the quarterback or the surroundings. I mean, that's what you would want of any, you would ask of any franchise, of any quarterback situation. So, and especially given how Will Levis played, it was his first game when he came out and he just bombed like 3-4 touchdowns like down the field. Fits like not just DeAndre Hopkins' skill set, but the way Calvin Ridley plays the game as well. So it's just stylistically, along with having Brian Callahan bringing his dad in for the offensive line portion of it. I mean, all of it to say that like that should be a team that, at least from a philosophical standpoint, they're doing the right things. From a process standpoint, they're doing the things that you should, to at least invest in a young quarterback and figure out if they want to continue to do so in the future. So yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. The only other team that I would toss into the mix is the Commanders. Right now, I think it's just Terry McLaurin is the only Washington Commander, like skill player, that's going in like the top 100 picks. Everybody else, from Jahan Dotson to Brian, oh my gosh, like why am I Brian Robinson? Sorry, yeah, almost Austin like Eckler. Brain fart on there. Austin Eckler, all those guys going outside of the top 100 picks, and we know what the ceiling is. The ceiling case is for Jaden Daniels, given the rushing, given what we saw from him in college, we know what that's going to be. But you toss a rookie quarterback in there, along with Cliff Kingsbury, the owner or creator of the horizontal raid. What are we going to get? And now there's been hype around Ben Sinnott already. Luke McCaffrey is starting to get some buzz. I mean, there's pieces and parts of that offense, along with the fact that, I mean, the play volume for the Commanders over the past few seasons have been in the bottom 10, bottom 12. And then for a guy like Cliff Kingsbury, who was running plays at 62, 63, 64 plays per game, which has been more the top end of things, I do at least expect that would be a boost for at least a guy like Terry McLaurin, who, if memory serves, he's only had more than 130 targets in a single season just one time. So if we're now upping not just our pass rate, but our play volume, at least that gives his ceiling outcome a bit more love, along with any of the wide receiver twos, if we weren't to learn who that wide receiver two is going to be at some point throughout the offseason. So I'm interested to see what the mini camp buzz is going to be, who that wide receiver two, or what the wide receiver two situation is going to look like, whether it's, again, Dotson now starts to show out in his third year, McCaffrey in the slot, whomever it's going to be, and what that tight end rotation is going to be between Sinnott and Ertz. I mean, all of that, all of the uncertainty surrounding the personnel in Washington is going to be one that I'm most interested in, at least outside of the list that you already provided.
Yeah, no, that's another good one. When I look at them, Jaden Daniels, you feel fine about no matter what, because he has that dual threat ability, but figuring out what's going to happen, especially at the tight end position. And we may not know for sure, but hopefully we get some clues as to what's going to happen. Drafters are already getting in on Ben Sinnott. And I like him, but he's a round 2 rookie tight end. Yeah, it's kind of okay, I like him. Yeah. But man, it won't surprise me at all if Zach Ertz plays the first half of the year, but Sinnott could be the guy that comes on, and in a best ball tournament where you're trying to win a bunch of money at the end, at least we want some good vibes, in the preseason. And then, we can see if he can kind of take over at the end of the year, like what we saw Trey McBride do in his rookie season from Zach Ertz with who? Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator. So yes, a very, very good team, and I'm no surprise. You picked a good one there, Chris.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, man. We're doing this together, man. All right, I'm just going to put this out there. I mean, do we need Ian? We've got good points. You've got good points. I mean, outside of a great day to be great. No, I'm just kidding, man. We love you. We love you, Ian. We're going to, at least we can say all that stuff while you're not here. And then when
we're just saying it because we're going to see if Ian actually listened to the show. We're not going to say
that's a good
anything.
Point.
We're going to see if he listens to it while he's on vacation. Hopefully he doesn't. And he just hangs out, with his lovely new wife, Julia. But if he gets an edge for fantasy, we're going to know if he listened to us or not, Chris.
Yeah, so nobody who watches the show or anything like that, don't tag him in any messages. Don't tell him that.
Now they're going to for sure tag him in messages.
Probably. All right, last question before we get on out of here. All right, favorite, agnostic of cost or whatever. I mean, and I want the folks to also tell us too. I mean,
you can't ask this question agnostic of cost. Cost is going to be a part of the question.
Well, I'm saying in ADP wise, I'm saying ADP bounds or whatever.
That's what I mean. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously going to be part of my answer. But go for it.
But for and everybody else, let us know, like, who is the stack that you want? Like, what is the primary stack? Once you get in, it's like, all right, man, I gotta get CJ Stroud and I gotta get Nico Collins, or I gotta get for me, you know, it's well, everybody knows who I'm gonna pick. But for you, Dwayne, if you get in a draft and you're queuing up, you're looking at the board and you're figuring out like, okay, it's like, well, how's this going to work out? Like, who is the draft that you don't want to leave the lobby without?
Oh man, it's so hard for me to answer that like just straight up. But I will say, like, if you're talking about the stacks that I love the most, and
Yeah.
I love Josh Allen. Just because of all the uncertainty has driven, the prices down for all the other weapons. There's so many different ways that you can mix it up. And the other part of it is like where Josh Allen goes, you're taking him in round 3. So it gets really tricky. But if I'm looking at Josh Allen versus DK Metcalf, who I like, I'm looking at Josh Allen, versus Cooper Kupp, Josh Allen versus Michael Pittman versus Malik Neighbors. Uh, I feel pretty good about Josh Allen. I like some of these other guys, but I know Josh Allen is still a really good player. And even last year, whenever we really saw the Bills' offense change and they weren't this high flying, aerial trapeze act that we've seen historically, over the last several years before this, and they turned in more of a ground and pound game. Allen still continued to score his fantasy points. So I just feel like he's so insulated from being a bad fantasy quarterback. And I think people are also assuming that the Bills offense can't be as good as it has been in the past. And while that's logical because you have Stephon Diggs, remember, your passers still own a major portion of what's happening here. And I still think Josh Allen is an elite quarterback, and he's got quite a few outs. They added Curtis Samuel, and that's a player that you can draft in round 9 or 10. We've got Keon Coleman as a rookie, and that's a player that you can draft in round 7. You already talked about Dalton Kincaid. You can go ahead and just take him in round 4 if you want, or let him come back to you in round 5. James Cook, a 31% targets per route run over the last 2 seasons whenever Stephon Diggs was not on the field. Are we underestimating how involved James Cook is going to be involved in the passing game here? So just so many different options and paths to this offense still being really, really good. So I just think the fact that you're getting Josh Allen at a spot where I think you're kind of hitting a tier break on some of these other players, and you could still get an elite quarterback that also over the course of the next 5 rounds, you could tack on 2 to 3 components that you get to stack with him. And I think that's just something that's really valuable. Like close was Lamar, but Lamar is a really tight window because you got to take Zay Flowers first, right? And then you got to turn around and hope you get Lamar, and then you might get Mark Andrews. But with Josh Allen, I think he's a better fantasy player than Lamar Jackson. Yeah, Lamar Jackson always has the QB1 ceiling overall. We've seen it before. But if I had to pick, I'm leaning with Josh Allen. Like he's done it multiple years. Lamar has not. So I just think there's a lot of value to Josh Allen in the way that you can stack his other players right now. And as reports around camp come out and people might start to get more certain about who they like, that means they could also get more comfortable with Josh Allen. That could push him up in drafts. And then if we know who the guys are that people are liking, you could very quickly get to a spot where it's hard to stack Josh Allen with Dalton Kincaid anymore. So especially right now at this time of year, I've been really enjoying from the middle position in the drafts, really trying to attack Allen. And oh, by the way, just like as a bonus, let's say you take Breece Hall around pick 6, pick 7. Well, who do the Bills play in week 17? Again, just a bonus. I don't let this drive the way I build my teams, but you get that Jets Buffalo game. And I mean, you could just, there could be an awesome opportunity there for you just to have that kind of game that you need to win a ton of money in best ball.
Yeah. I mean, that is the perfect answer right there. I mean, because I love, of course, my Bengals stacks.
The Bengals were my number 2 answer. I think Joe Burrow's underpriced. So
yeah, and I think I will not be like Dwayne said it, not me. All right. I'm just agreeing with him as the biased Bengals fan. But that is a stack that's going to be like cost dependent. Like you have to be in those early round slots in order to pick up Jamar Chase and of course get grabbing like T. Higgins. You might be able to reach on him given where he goes now at his depressed cost, but that is a stack that you can wind up making. We do know that we were talking earlier about concentrated offenses like the Eagles passing game and insert like maybe even like the 49ers passing game, the Rams like to some extent as well. That's another one of those value picks that
where are you on Mahomes? Because honestly, that's the other one I love. Like it's the 3 I had were the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Bengals. and again, a lot of it just is based on where you can get all the players.
Mhm.
It's dicey to try to get Kelsey because you're gonna have to reach for him in the middle of round 3 to then
Yeah,
turn
that's where I'm
around and
at.
take Patrick Mahomes in round 4, which I'm fine. I've done it a couple of times. Even with
Yeah.
Laporta on the board, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and do this and build a few of these teams this way. But I really like Mahomes too, man, because I mean, coming back in round 5, like you're gonna get one of Marquise Brown or you're gonna get Xavier Worthy. You
Yeah.
might get lucky and get both of them, and then you also get that Rashee Rice discount.
Right.
And there's a chance Mahomes is the QB1 overall easily in any season, and they've upgraded their offense a lot. So, what are your thoughts on that one?
That's another one where it's like, I don't like, regardless of cost, I don't mind reaching in order to complete that particular stack. And that is another one that falls into the high efficiency offense, like high pass rate over expectation. And it could wind up actually creating the value that you need in order to start to vault up some of the, like, vault up the board. Cause like Patrick Holmes, for where he's being drafted right now, yeah, it's like, that's the spot that you want. And those are the conditions that you want, the type of offense that you want, that you would want in order to really start to like press your league in terms of guys that you'd want to draft. So, yep, I'm
And on the
100%
Buffalo thing, I'll give folks like a little tip. It's I know you might feel like you're reaching a little bit with a few of the guys that are on the board, but when you take Josh Allen in the middle of round 3, you have a way better chance of completing the stacks with him based on their ADPs. Where Dalton Kincaid goes, where's Keon Coleman go? Because I've had Josh Allen fall to me at the end of round 3, and you're like, oh, it's Josh Allen. I'm just going to take him.
Yeah.
Dalton Kincaid doesn't make it. And you don't want to reach that much. I'm willing to reach 5 or 6 picks, but I'm not reaching like a round of ADP, especially early on. Keon Coleman, you're going to have to feel like you're reaching almost 2 rounds to get in because he's typically not me. I've had him a couple of times make it back down to me on that other end. So then you're really looking at, okay, when it gets to you in that round 9, 10, 8, 9, 10 range, you're just going to have to jam it with Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir, some of those guys. So it's tricky to get the stack the way you want it when you get Josh Allen at the end of round 3 versus if you grab him in the middle of round 3, it becomes very, very reasonable for you to come away with at least 2 players you really like. Remember, you're going to have a shot at Dalton Kincaid. If you want to just take him, you take him in round 4 if you're setting up to come back for James Cook in round 5. If not, you're just like, I'm going to get one of Dalton Kincaid or James Cook in round 5. Then I'm going to come back in round 7. I'm going to have a really good shot to get Keon Coleman. You miss Keon Coleman, you still have 2 more backup plans with Curtis Samuel or Khalil Shakir to end up with 2 of these guys. So
Right.
I rank that one a little higher because the needle's a little bit tighter to thread on Mahomes. You're going to get one of his guys, but getting 2 or 3 of them is
That's a bit
harder
tougher
than Josh Allen.
Right. It's the same thing with Burrow. Like you could get like T. Higgins, like Jamar Chase is, of course, like draft slot dependent. T is fine if you're into Gesicki and Burton, but it's like after those guys, it's like really like, are you going to be able to harness the full value of that stack unless you get those guys earlier in drafts? Whereas, like to your point with Josh Allen, it's like you can draft him, and then everybody afterwards, like right now when we don't know a lot, it is fairly easy to pick up those guys and wind up completing the stack that you need in order to help win your league. But all right, so we've done it all here. We said it all. Well, actually, we haven't said it all because we're going to be talking about more of this stuff next week and the weeks to come throughout the summer as we learn more throughout OTAs, about mini camps, and whatever news and notes that can come up. So, I mean, I'm Chris Allen. I appreciate everybody for checking us out. Give love to Mr. Harditz and his wife, like as they're now off doing their thing. If you can, hit him up on Twitter. Let him know that you checked us out. Let us know that we were like talking stuff behind his back or whatever, if you'd like to. But otherwise, until next week, I'm Chris Allen for Dwain, for our producer James. Love y'all. Be safe this weekend. Take care of you. In the words of Marshawn Lynch, take care of y'all mentals. Take care of y'all chicken. And we'll catch y'all next week.